Football fans.
The Tennessee Human Rights Commission, and of course we have with us the Executive Director of the Tennessee Human Rights Commission, Ms. Beverly Watts. And of course, Ms. Watts, before we had our first commercial break, we promised that we'd give you an opportunity to talk about some of the issues that the Tennessee Human Rights Commission is concerned with at this point. And I would imagine that whatever those issues are concerned in Tennessee will be of some real concern, perhaps all across the nation. So let's look at it from that perspective.
Right. Now, let me give you just a little background in terms of how many cases and things. On an annual basis, we're getting probably somewhere around 7,000 to 8,000 calls. That means that somebody thinks they've been discriminated against. They'll call us or write us or stop by one of our offices and fill out a complaint form on on the website. And then they'll come in and we'll determine whether or not it's valid. We'll determine whether or not we have to file it. We file about 700 cases a year in employment, another 150 in housing, and about 20 in public accommodations arena. So that's kind of what we did in 2006 based on our annual report. In addition to that, some things will refer to other agencies. So our staff is always answering questions, talking with the public, determining what, providing answers. So that's one of the big things we do. And sometimes people say, well, how many cases do you have? I said, that really does not really document the kind of work staff does. So we do a lot of work on the phone, a lot of information. When people come to us, we'll determine whether or not they're a member of one of the groups they've talked about, whether it's a race issue. Are they a member of that group? Was the decision did the action happen within 180 days? And that's critical because we have 180 days to file it unless it's continuing. An example of a continuing issue would be you work for a company and they continually discipline you, and they do it every 30 days. And you believe that you're being treated differently because of maybe your race, your age, or something, and every 30 days you're being suspended. And that's a continuing violation, and sometimes that will occur. So that means from the last date, it's 180 days. So if it happened to you yesterday, 180 days from yesterday, you could file a complaint. But if 30 days from now it happens again, it will extend it by another 30 days. So we always tell people, get in. If you think you've been discriminated against, report it as quickly as possible because that's important for us. Other things in employment, failure to hire, failure to train, obviously dismissals, any kind of discipline whatsoever, failure to pay in an appropriate manner. And then I think, the whole notion of sexual harassment, equal pay, those are issues that we get a lot of, where there are comments in the workplace about things that some people feel are inappropriate and sexual in nature. So we see a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of racial harassment cases of late, where there are a lot of racial epithets and other things being used in the workplace. May or may not rise to the level of what is called a hostile working environment, but certainly some of the things that will make it difficult for you to do your job.
And so you've got something that you characterize in the employment area as a hostile work environment. I mean, how does that work?
A hostile work environment is one in which, for some reason, characteristics such as your race, your gender, or others are in fact used against you, or negative comments are made in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable because of who you are. People are saying the N word, people may be using the B word for women, those kinds of things. It could be pervasive, which means it has to occur on an ongoing basis, and could be such that it's created an environment in which you cannot do your job appropriately because of the stress, the pressures, and the other things. And it's commonly called the hostile work environment when that happens. One time might be sufficient to prove hostile work environment. It may not be. That's why it's important for us to get all the information we can. Our investigators will look at the facts and make a determination as to whether or not discrimination existed. Just one time, and I keep emphasizing this, may not be discrimination. It could be uncomfortable, and that's something that we like to talk with people about, like to counsel them. And I always tell people, if I'm counseling, please don't curse your boss out, because if you do, you will create some other problems. Even if they cursed you, what happens is usually there's a workplace rule, so that can create some problems. So we're always trying to counsel people and provide advice about how they can act appropriately in situations of this nature. So our investigators are investigators, they're counselors, they listen a lot, they gather information from the respondents, and the respondents is the employer. In housing, we have pretty much some of the same kinds of issues. Failure to rent because someone is black or Sometimes they're interracial couples and they will not rent a place because you're married to someone of a different race.
Do you get many cases like that?
We get some of those, and they somewhat go in kind of cycles depending on the community. Sometimes the smaller the community, the more likely we are to see that. With large numbers of Hispanics in this region, we have issues where people refuse to rent to Hispanics, or they rent to Hispanics and charge them exorbitant rents, and they harass them and threaten them with respect to immigration issues. When they rent them housing, so we see that. So we see a lot of those issues, or they tell them they won't rent to them because they have children.
And so in a real sense, Ms. Watts, that we see this Human Rights Commission as an organization, but you're saying is that this organization is really involved in terms of trying to make sure that there is no discrimination. I mean, you're sort of fighting sort of a hidden battle. People might not know too much about what you're doing. Is that what we're saying?
That's really it. And we process complaints in the three areas we talked about: housing, employment, public accommodations. We do advocacy, education, and outreach in the other areas. So when we look at our charge and our challenge, it is to prevent and eradicate discrimination in simple terms. It appears in different work elements. One is receiving and investigating complaints of discrimination. The other is providing education and outreach to the community as a whole. And we provide it to the public in general, to employers, to people who provide housing, and to organizations who provide public accommodations, because our charge is to make sure that people know the right thing to do if they're doing that, and if people have been discriminated, they know where they can come to get relief.
And so it's a real important organization that as we make preparations for this second commercial break. And what I'd like for you to do during this third segment that we have here, Ms. Watts, is to think in terms of some of the shortcomings that you might have identified in terms of the way we do things in this country and what we ought to be able to do. I say that, for example, many people I've talked to have said that it might be time in this country to have a new civil rights bill, and et cetera, et cetera. And perhaps if you so think, then maybe you might be able to give us some examples as to why that would be necessary, and et cetera. And so that's what we are more concerned about. We'll be more concerned about during this final segment, this third segment. And of course, we've got about 15 seconds before this segment end, but that's I think that you're essentially giving us the information that is really eye-opening for me, because I know that you're involved in a lot of things, but I didn't know it was that much activity that you're involved in. Of course, we'll hear more of that when we come back following this short commercial break. Tennessee Human Rights Commission